Reading, there's a reception, please stay. There's warm things. Actually, I don't know that that's true, but I'm saying it. There's warm things, lots of good things to munch on. And we have some copies of this book by Al Young, Something About the Blues. And if you want to buy a copy, I bet Al would be willing to inscribe it for you, thus making it very valuable about 3 or 4 years from now or 50 years from now. Billy Joe has one of those, and it has a CD in it. And if you still use CDs, you're good. Anyway, this is here. So, and I guess before Billy Joe does an introduction, I think we should put our hands, our cold hands together and warm them up for Al Young, who came across the country. And now William J. Harris is going to introduce Al, and this is going to be fun. Thank you, Billy Joe.
Good evening. And it's nice that people could make out. I'm going to... I knock things over, so I don't want when I start going like this. I first met Al Young when I was a graduate student at Stanford University in 1968. He was the Jones Lecturer in Creative Writing. In a short time, he, Nate Mackey, the poet, and Bob O'Meally, the scholar, both fellow graduate students at the time, became close buddies. It was a golden time for me. All three introduced me into the world of jazz, and was the first time I was surrounded by a world of black writers, including Ishmael Reed, who sometimes visited from Berkeley, and sometimes we visited Ishmael Reed. Al and I spent a lot of time sitting on the Student Union terrace, sipping pea soup, talking and watching the world go by. Like Langston Hughes and Amiri Baraka, Al is a blues jazz poet. He says in A Dance for Ma Rainey, "I'm going to be just like you, Ma. Rainy this Monday morning, clouds puffing up out of my head like those balloons that float above the faces of white people in the funny papers. I'm going to cry so sweet and so low and so dangerous, Ma, that this message is going to reach you back in 1922. And of course, Ma Rainey is the great jazz blues singer who really was at her heyday in the 1920s. Like a blues in the heart, there's much pain and joy in the poems of Al Young. Al defines the blues broadly. The long list of figures and something about the blues goes from Jelly Roll Morton to Marvin Gaye to Leonard Bernstein. He calls the blues a national American culture. The blues defy and accommodate all takers and givers. A few of his collections are Dancing Poems, which the above poem is from, Heaven, The Sound of Dreams Remembered, and the most recent and above mentioned Something About the Blues. He has also written musical memoirs, including Bodies and Soul, Kind of Blue, and Drowning the Sea of Love. These works are about music as a remembering. He has written many beautiful novels. His first, Snakes, and later Seduction by Light are two of the books. Snakes is one of my favorite books. Al Young has received the Wallace Stegner Fellowship, the Guggenheim Fellowship, a Fulbright, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship. He served as Poet Laureate of California from 2005 to 2008. He is currently Distinguished Professor of Writing at the California College of Arts, San Francisco. Here is a man of great craft and soul. He can write an alluring blues or a bewitching sonnet. In an inscription to one of his books, To Me and Susan, Heaven, he says, May its content brighten a moment or two. His poems do a lot more than that. It is my pleasure to give you Al Young.
Thank you so much. During a pair of interviews, one auditory, the other visual, that we did previous to this, we calculated we'd have maybe 6 people. So I'm overwhelmed by the presence here. You've more than tripled that. It's an honor to be here at UPenn, and it's an honor to be back in Philadelphia. I think the last time I was here was under the auspices of your wonderful poet, crazed like most poets, but wonderful. Lamont Steptoe brought me in for some special reading. And I had a great time and was very well entertained and welcomed. And so I've always had wonderful feelings towards Philadelphia. But one of the details to which Mr. Steptoe took me to task was in my novel, Seduction by Light, which is narrated by a former movie actress, now become Hollywood maid, Beverly Hills maid, who has a love child, as the saying goes now, by a former agent of hers, Harry Silvertone, who becomes a big man in Hollywood. And her son is now about to enter UCLA Film School, and she wants him, she knows, she's psychic, she knows she's not going to live long. She wants him to know who his father is, because if he's going to make it in the film world, he's got a built-in connection that he never knew about. It's one of my favorite novels of mine, Seduction by Light. Where was I going with this? What I wanted to say is that Lamont Steptoe, in that novel, she's named her son Ben, or Benji, after Benjamin Franklin. It's a very fanciful, imaginative novel, and Benjamin Franklin is a character in the novel. And I make the statement, I, the author, boldly state that of the so-called founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin was the only one who was adamantly against slavery and said that a democratic republic could not endure with slavery as part of its legacy. He may or may not have been correct. We'll see. And so when I got off the plane and Steptoe met me, he says, "We got some surprises for you. You think Benjamin Franklin's so hot? We found out some stuff that you should know about him." And it turns out that Benjamin Franklin, like a lot of people don't know that New York was a great place for slaves until very well into the 19th century. And so he brought all of this stuff that he and his friends had gathered. He said, "Now you go home tonight and you read that, Al Young." And so I did read it, and I wasn't as shocked or outraged as he would have thought, because I had matured even at that point to the place where I understood that there's a backstory to absolutely everything. And so we must always be wary of these smooth stories. We've been tossing around the adjective smooth before getting here. As in, smooth operator. He was a smooth operator, that kind of thing. So it's a pleasure to be back here where I know I am highly regarded, and I'm finding out well-loved, and it feels good. Everyone holds out for love. It's Leonard Cohen's Suzanne. They're leaning out for love, and they'll lean that way forever. That's me, and that's at the center of my poetry, and I'm delighted to be here and to share some of it with you. Is Jessica around? Jessica, there was a pair of readers in an eyeglass case. Are they here? Oh, they're behind me. Okay. Classic poet. No, over there. So I'm going to sit, and what I want to remind you about this is certainly I'll read a lot, but at the same time, these days, as I approach 80 in 6 months, I'm interested in actually conversing with people. So anything you want to talk about or ask me about or tell me about, I'm all ears and all heart to that, because I think that writers have to listen to their readers or their listeners, and vice versa. My favorite story about that is about someone I mentioned earlier, a welder named Jim Johnson who impressed me when I was very young because he had published some westerns, some cowboy stories. He's African American, and it was very unusual back in the 60s to find someone who had actually made some money. He had a facsimile of the check, and I was impressed by that. But Jim Johnson actually loaned a novel of mine. I think it was Sitting Pretty, and my third novel. And he loaned it to his cousin, and she wouldn't give it back. And he made up a story. You know, he created a fiction. He said, that's the only copy that Al Young has of his own book. And if you don't give it back, you know, you'll really upset him. And to her credit, and to my delight, what she told her cousin Jim Johnson was, fuck Al Young. She said, all he did was write the book. I'm the one that's got to read it. You know, I love that remark. So a lot of writers forget this. They all want to write a novel, but, you know, we don't think about all the people who have to read all those novels. At any rate, I'm going to sit and pretend we're somewhere familial. And as you listen to the poems, and if they spark anything that you want to ask about or talk about or share, I would be just delighted to open myself up to that. So, transition. Can you see me if I sit down here? Sure. Yeah. Okay, good. This is intimate. I had planned this rather elaborate presentation in which I wanted to demonstrate some of the things that I learned from a bunch of, I was in Bahrain under the auspices of the State Department. One of the first things that came to me, I'd worked for the old United States Information Agency, as had my good friend Ishmael Reed, which he called the USIA, the CIA, you know, that kind of thing. But after Jesse Helms personally closed down the USIA because he said that we had won hearts and minds, that we had defeated and closed down the Soviet Union. It was actually the KGB. It was Gorbachev who shut down the Soviet Union, working with us. He said, why waste the taxpayers' money? So the first thing that the administration that I was not particularly fond of, the Bush-Cheney administration, did was they sent for me to go and travel to the Mideast, you know, to Jordan and Bahrain and Egypt and Israel and the West Bank and all of that. And I welcomed it because it was an opportunity to reach people that I wanted to know a lot more about. And in Bahrain, let's see, I'm trying to think of, his name was Johnny Young. He was an African American, but he was the in charge of he was our ambassador to Bahrain. Now, to put Bahrain into perspective, I'd gone to Kuwait before going to Bahrain, and Kuwait blew my mind. Everything was new. You didn't see any car that was older than 2 years. I was complaining about the water to the hotel that I was staying in, wondering if it were safe. He said, well, you can drink some of our water, you know. I said, what is your water? He said, it's desalinated, but it's perfectly safe. You might taste a little hint of salt, and that was all true. But everything was shiny and new and worked. And when I got to Bahrain, I saw older cars, and things weren't quite as shiny and new as they had been in Kuwait. And the person who had received me from the Bahraini diplomatic corps, he looked exactly like the American jazz trumpeter, Dizzy Gillespie. So much so that he had to read up on Dizzy and learn about him, because when Americans came, he said, you look like Dizzy Gillespie. So he knew everything about Dizzy Gillespie. I said, why are you guys so different from Kuwait? He says, well, you know, Kuwait, they're conservative and very stiff and all of that. And so everybody has to run away from that. So all of these people who in Kuwait preach all of these puritanical things, where do you think they come to, as you Americans say, unwind? They come to Bahrain because we have nightclubs and we have, you know, alcohol and all of this. And I said, how do you square that with Islam and so forth? He says, well, You know, we're smarter than they are. We buy their old cars that they want to, their new cars when they get old, and they want to do away with it. And we are honored to have you here, Al Young. Johnny Young has been talking about you. He's been reading your work. And I said, well, how much time do we have before I have to speak? He says, in 20 minutes. And so he drove me over there. And Ambassador Young had chosen 3 wise men. They were 3 Islamic scholars. And the main thing that they impressed on me, that I've never forgotten, and which I'll share some of with you this evening, is that poetry properly begins as an amalgam of everything, of dance, of song, of lyricism, and rhetorical eloquence. And they pointed out that if sculpture were to go away, if painting were to go away, if cinema were to go away, and drama and music, any arts that you could think of, it would all remain intact in poetry, because in poetry you have all those aspects. There's dance, you're painting images of things, you hear music, and I had never thought about it that way. And so I realized that I'd been doing that all along, because my first 10 years were spent in the American South in Mississippi, and I was surrounded by natural storytellers who were very poetic in the way in which they describe things. And at that point, after having learned to read at age 3, the difference between the spoken word and the written word held me fast. I really was fascinated by all of that, and I still am to this day. And so when you read my poetry or my fiction or my journalism or my memoirs, anything that I write, I pay a lot of attention to detail, and I pay a lot of attention to the pictures that I'm painting. And as I told my worthy constituents over here, Tyrone and Billy Joe, and call him Al too, I pointed out that people should have more interest in poetry and look at its origins, because I think it's our original language. It's as close to telepathy as we're going to get through language. And it grows more and more interesting as time goes by. This little device I just picked up is a tickless clock, but it helps to keep me on target here. I see it's 6:30 already, so we've got to boogie a little bit. I'm going to open up with a poem that we discussed before this reading, and I pointed out in the recording that for 50 years I was trying to get into Poetry Chicago, because that was the one that you had to crack. And finally, after 50 years, I got in there. And I got in there under honorable circumstances, because the occasion was to celebrate the great poet Gwendolyn Brooks, who became a friend, but who had always been a poet to whom I was attracted. And what I loved about Gwendolyn Brooks is that she took on many voices, and through imagination, she was able to explore the lives of many different kinds of people. So that when I teach poetry now, as I sometimes do at California College of the Arts, I don't let my students write what they want to write. Meaning, if I let them do that, they'll write all poems about what they think are themselves. You know, the I is a fiction as well, and that comes across in this poem. And it gets kind of dull, because none of us is infinitely interesting. So keep Gwendolyn Brooks in mind when you hear this poem, which is called Key to the Dollar Store. You can hear me? Okay. Key to the dollar store. Just tell me, who the hell am I? What powers do I hold? What right have I to say my, or mine, or me? All honey glazed, all bulletproofed, and worshipful of any gangster eye. The key to the dollar store hangs on my belt. Yes, my again. And what of roof, of bread, of loving laughter? What's then? My vinyl favorite, Booker Little, vintage, soothes me. He jars our ears with trumpet joy and stuff freed folks stash in cabinets. Never one to make too much of why we love and what. I love my powers. I might put you in my will. This book here, which was published, I guess about 10 years ago, the publisher told me that she wanted to let people hear my voice, and so that's why this quaint CD is in the back. But I was very lucky to get excellent musicians who make me sound good. You see how much I like this book? It's all torn up. You'll find this in the recording. I think it's pretty lively. It takes its point of origin from James Brown, the great James Brown, who, on one of his amazing recordings called Cold Sweat, Parts 1 and 2, I used to love the way that they would split those sides. One side would be side 1 and side 2. And there's a point at which he lets the drummer, Clyde Stubblefield, loose a little bit. And he shouts in that James Brown way, "Should we get a drummer some? Get a drummer some? Get a drummer." And then Stubblefield plays that little lick that all of the younger drummers picked up, and you'll hear it reflected. Do da do do da do da da do da da. That kind of rhythm. So Louis Hayes, a great drummer. He worked a lot with Oscar Peterson and with a lot of other people. He was in my junior high, and he was a fascinating character on his own. And I took the title that James Brown's exclamation expressed, "Should we give the drummer some?" And I took it as a moment to talk about French and American cultures that stand out to us. It's kind of strange, but I think if poetry isn't kind of strange, it's not that good. I think I will need these glasses. Giving the drummer some opens up with the letters LHOOQ. Does that sound familiar to anyone? You? Yeah. Yeah, you're doing all my work for me. That's good. That's what I like. That's what I like about community stuff. LHOOQ. If you don't know French, it translates quite roughly into English. She's hot in the ass, and that's the one where he has the mustache on the Mona Lisa, which in early 20th century was avant-garde. And I like to point out, I can't point it out often enough since the close of World War I has just commemorated its 100th anniversary. What a thing to celebrate. But people have no idea of the carnage that was waged in World War I. Europeans lost millions and millions of people. Americans lost quite a few, almost 1 million, but not quite as much as the Europeans did. So that if you were an artist or an intellectual in Europe at that time, and you reasoned, if this is the best that Western civilization can give us, then let's just get irrational. Let's try out all kinds of crazy things. Hence, Dadaism, Surrealism, all of that. When it comes to America, when these things come to America, it's like New Wave music, it was later dubbed, when it came from England, where it was a protest on the part of working class Brits who knew that they weren't going to have the opportunities to advance like their parents did. And so they rebelled, by coming up with the music that made fun of and scorned the bourgeoisie. When it came to America, it just became another cute way to make music or make art and so forth. We always take the politics out of everything. That's what we do over here because we're all middle class, or so we thought until recently. So all that is the background. LHOOQ, LHOOQ, early 20th century ready-made by Marcel Duchamp. That's the epigraph. She's all fucked up and French. He knows. He knows the cultural pressure she's under, knows what she started, knows what won't end. The big sky color of her eyes, the European complication she's hooked into, all that shit. He knows it well. At first, he didn't know much French, but he got it together pretty quick. He got the rhythm of it, its round and nasal loveliness, the underflow, the way sometimes she sounded like a horn, other times like reeds. There'd been a point he'd read about when the Mediterranean had been like a Muslim lake. The Moors had come that close to taking France. Now here they were again, back, and standing unbathed, backless, blue, bikinied, blunt, her butt. 2 round vowels not yet moist with towels because she liked the sound of funky in her proud tongue. Funky, as you wanna be, gallant, Gallic mama. How long could he hang in Paris between gigs? How thick did he wish to get with Kluck and Griff, referring to the great drummer Kenny Clark, who was one of the co-founders of what came to be called bebop, and Johnny Griffith, who was the quintessential American expatriate in Paris. And Kenny, and Dexter, and Mal Waldron, and before them, Don Byas, Sidney Bechet, Steve Lacy had hipped him when he first hit town. Dance, man, do your dance and keep moving. For a class drummer, he figured, I ain't doing bad. It wasn't the French invented surrealism. It was Americans. Jazz, too. It was time to drag Monique, he decided, over to the Stereophonique to debut his new CD. As Romeo once said to Juliet, haven't we met? He had no doubt that he could straighten her out. Strange poem, but that's the way it came out. What I didn't say about Louis Hayes is that he was working with the Cannonball Adderley Quartet. And that was the first time I'd seen him work in person. It was at Jazz Workshop San Francisco. And they'd just come back from Paris. And I said, how'd you like Paris? He said, I love Paris. I said, did you get your French right? He says, no, but he says, those beautiful women, says, you can get it together pretty quick. So that's what inspired some of those lines. Moss. The Rolling Stones, a hard English group, busted for heroin at their southern France estate. 50 grams of smack a week, said the man on the news, just to keep their little family extended. Well, so what? What'll happen to them? So what if the air back of these superstars gets waved away from time to time, like those costly backdrops in the old film factories? Charles Christopher Parker, a genius among geniuses, was granted diplomatic immunity the moment that he died. Eleanora Fagan Goff, the Billie Holiday, who now powers many a silver cloud, was a sufferer among sufferers, with narcs up in her deathbed. Even Bela Lugosi, our beloved Transylvanian, sustained his habit in real life and metaphorically on screen. Ah, the Rolling Stones, a hard English group, heroes of an American era. Self-invented Americans fascinate me too. They used to Alistair MacLean wrote a whole book in which he talks about American names. Thelonious Monk, Sally Ride. You can't make these things up. And Billie Holiday, whose real name, is the poem states, was Eleanora Fagan Goff. She made up the name Billie Holiday. That was after her father. I think her father was 14 and her mother was 13 when she was born. And he was a guitarist. He would put her up on a chest of drawers and play guitar to her. Billie was also interesting because she was Catholic, unlike Ella Fitzgerald and Carmen McRae and some of the other singers that we admire who come out of the church, the Protestant church, and usually the Baptist church. She came out of Catholic Baltimore, and there are a few who speculate that it was that doleful sound of Catholic religious music that gave Billie her edge. But what Billie had to say when she was asked about it, she says, always listen for those sad, solemn Jewish songs, because they always have a little sadness in them. So everything I sing has a little bit of that in it. And I think that's how I get over, that kind of thing. The stuff that you learn. Bela Lugosi was a heroin addict. People don't know that. And he was a bad heroin addict. And now in an era of what's been termed, what do we call it now? Opioid self-destruction. The whole way of looking at heroin addiction, I speak as someone who's lost 3 brothers, younger brothers, I'm the oldest of 7, to drugs. And so I take a particular interest in, I've never tried heroin or any of that stuff, but I had a genius younger brother Walter, whose IQ was off the charts. And he said it was the only thing that relaxed his mind. So evidently a lot of people are finding that. I mentioned Ella Fitzgerald, so let's go right over to her. All but you very young people remember the commercial in which Ella is prominent, in which it's for Memorex. All this stuff is quaint, tape. And the line was it Memorex? And in the commercial, Ella sings some tones that break a glass, as I recall, a champagne glass or a wine glass or something like that. And it was a very dramatic commercial, and that figures into this poem. Ella Fitzgerald begins as a dancer with her sister. They had won the Apollo contest. The Apollo's been around a long time. And I would hate to have to work that audience. I don't know if you remember Showtime at the Apollo, that series. First note. People said, no, boo. And Sandman Sims would come out and drag you off the stage. And it was quite dramatic. But they had won, but she becomes a singer. She didn't sing at all because somebody wanted her to sing. And so it's like Nina Simone. Nina Simone was trained as a classical pianist. The first gig that she got, which I think was in Baltimore, the husband and wife owners of the club wanted her to sing. She says, I don't sing. I said, well, you're going to have to sing on this one, or you won't get paid. And so that's how Nina Simone got made. So here's Ella Fitzgerald. Prelude to a Kiss. It's a Duke Ellington song that's quite chromatic, half steps down the piano keyboard. Da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 ya. That is my heart trying to compose a prelude to a kiss. Most singers say prelude, but Sarah Vaughan says prelude. Prelude to a Kiss in memory of Ella Fitzgerald. There was a time when singing or playing a ballad was almost the same as the whisper your lips make the instant before they pooch out and stretch, then reach to touch hers. Her lips will feel the warm wind your whisper makes in the life-preserving urgency of moving mouth to mouth. Whole career moves, investments have been based on this, a kiss. There at the after whisper, when breath saith unto breath, death, go back out and wait in the car, baby. We got some unfinished business we need to take care of up in here. There, Ben Webster or Lester might pester you into listening to thrilling snapshots of their up-close worlds, where rivers and stars and cyclones and witch hunts and hatred found and hounded them endlessly. But Ella's voice would graze the words and say, psst, psst, and shh, shh. Whenever body snatchers invaded, remember the Memorex commercial. Shattered, the glass itself was thinking, better this way than whoops. Better this than drunk-ass fans arguing who was best, Billy, Sarah, Dinah, Carmen, or Ella. There she stood, or there she sat at piano, not playing, sometimes in pain, a twisted ankle, a mangled heart, wiggling around on that bench, whispering her blood beat to crowds in Spain, Brazil, Japan, the Netherlands, Australia, Oslo, LA, Akron, Accra, Krakow. And oh, how they knew when her voice, a whip, a feather, was busy inventing universes they always thought had been in place all along. Wrong. Ella Fitzgerald launched songs far more reliably than NASA launched spacecraft. She sent them spinning into orbits that ennobled, that ran rainbows around your shoulders. We couldn't carry her around in that basket forever. Ella owned the world the way she earned our owning her. Every time her voice floats back, that kiss moves in and then begins. Short poem. Benny Carter. Benny Carter is not very well known. He had no bad habits, except smoking, which eventually killed him, and his own smoking, and working in those romantic-looking, when we see photographs of jazz musicians in the 30s and 40s with all that smoke, we think, oh, that's great. No, it's killing those people, working in those environments. And I had the pleasure of meeting Benny Carter, and I gave him a copy of this poem, and he was very moved by it. It's very short, but he understood what it meant. The Art of Benny Carter. He was an alto saxophonist, but he was also a trumpet player, and he played each with facility, and he wrote a lot of good music. I could sing some of that too, but I'll just let you.
Oh, Al, sing one.
Oh, I'm trying to think of, there's one that's very famous. For some reason, I'm losing it right now. But it'll come back at some point in the reading, and I'll sing it for you out of order, and you'll understand what it is. There are afternoons in jazz when a leaf turns and falls with so much barely noticed purity that the not-so-sacred meaning of everything men and women have tried to do beyond keep afloat becomes as clear as ocean air. That's it. Okay, let's get away from the direct jazz motif. It's all in here somewhere. People were always telling me, I'm trying to think of this, there was one poet in particular. He was at Stanford. Who was William Pitt Root. I think it was William Pitt Root said, Al, you write all these poems that celebrate love and joy and all that. Man, there's no future in that. I said, what do you mean? He says, people like stuff that's depressing and dark and bad. That's where the money is in poetry. And it made sense. I listen to what everybody says because you think about it in another frame of mind and you realize what they were trying to tell you. So I was in, I think I was in England when I wrote this poem, in London. And I was laughing at it when I wrote it because I knew I'd taken his advice, but made fun of it. Got it all in the title. Depression, Blues, Flamenco, Wine, Despair. That's the title. Depression, blues, flamenco, wine, despair, sunk in. They make you cross your heart and die for hope. Dark times come at you. They don't care. So deal with this, they say. And so you buy the pain and stress, the restlessness, the works. Low back pain, aches and limps, the twitch of fear your face betrays. John Dizzy Burks Gillespie's cheeks puffed out, fat love and itch scratched by the trumpet at his goateed lip. They said, take chances, stretch, jump at the sun, be corny sometimes. You can't spend your whole life acting hip. Be corny, have yourself some fun. You can't be cool forever, so relax. Diz knew puffed cheeks were anything but chic. But when you closed your eyes, you heard him axe infinitives, split atoms, hairs. You speak that tongue, curves, flatlands, all of it. You do. You understood the hoodoo stab of hurt, the blues, their messy messages, a few trashed hopes, some lame goodbyes, her skirt, your coat, the folded jeans, wet tights, black night is falling all around you in the rain. Dark times can fix you in the light of reason, recognition, lasers, pain. Okay, here's one I haven't read in years, but back in the days, we were talking about, the three of us, Al and Billy Joe and Tyrone, about the passages that the development of what came to be called black literature or African American literature had to take. And when I first started writing, I wasn't black enough. You know, and that first novel, which ended up being a success, was rejected by 5 or 6 publishers. And one editor actually wrote to me and said, a little bit too sweet for a ghetto novel, you know, because in those days, if you weren't threatening violence of some kind, you couldn't be a real black writer. So this is a reflection on that. Your basic black poet. I can't remember how long this is, but I think it's pretty short. No, it's longer than I thought. Okay. You know, you write so much you can't remember your own stuff. Your basic black poet. He mounts the stand and people turn colors. Where in the world could he be coming from? What can he tell us new about the racial situation? Why are there oceans in his poems, sunshine, glacial journeys toward reunion? What's the matter with his diction, man? He sure don't sound that black. Now, if he was from Johannesburg, better yet, from Mozambique, or even St. Martin's, it would be easier to relate all them drum beats and bananas in his blood with the sun pounding down and around, that Afric look, a sound. Anyway, if he was for real, he'd be off chasing flies way out in left field, or recovering a broken jaw from a big-time heavyweight bout. Off into the Ghanaian ghettos, revolution, wrapped in a gown. Any way you look at it, the dude is irrelevant and dangerous to the community. At one point, when I was, what was I? Oh, right, I was getting a degree in Spanish at University, UC Berkeley. And 3 of my friends and classmates were at Herrick Hospital. Herrick Hospital in Berkeley was the place where you sent people who were kind of crazy and losing their minds. And if I went to visit one, I got to visit all 3 of them. And I reflected on that and wrote a poem about it. It's called Herrick Hospital, fifth floor. They were all on the fifth floor. And this is what came out. That's why poets are so interesting, and poetry is so interesting to me, because you never know what poets are going to notice. But it's almost always things that other people don't see or take for granted and have gotten used to. But a poet who loves language and knows how to use it, because language is the instrument of the poet in the same way that a saxophone or a trombone or a French horn or cello is the instrument of musicians, people who play music. Herrick Hospital, fifth floor. Oh, yeah, I've forgotten this part. The epigraph says, for a musician friend who finally OD'd on blackness. There's a typo in here. It says, or a musician friend who finally OD'd on blackness. And it's the first time I've seen that typo. The F is left off of 4. And I was telling Billy Joe at lunch and his lovely wife Susan that one of the delights of aging is that you misread or mistype or mishear things. And sometimes the stuff that you mistype or misread or mishear is better than the thing that you were supposed to be doing. Because, from a lifetime of dealing with language, you know a good thing when you hear it. Well, so you've gone and overdone it again. Overdosed yourself this time on blackness. Locked between Blue Cross, nurse-padded walls, the unreliable air outside and beyond, shot up with softening Berkeley sunshine. Phrasing fails you. Diction cramps. It's all a loss and reflection too costly. What color were you ever but infamous blue? If music weren't sound and its realness didn't cleanse, I know you could never walk, much less dance, out of this white room again. I love this book because all of it is about one thing, and I'll let you decide on what that is. Distances. I was sitting in the London airport. What was the deal? I carried on a 5-year romance with an anthropologist that I'd met at Stanford when she was married to a Stegner fellow. It's Peter Smart and his wife Christina, and we loved each other. But long distance stuff is hard to hold together. But it was fun while it lasted. So I'm sitting in the Heathrow, and I'm listening to the announcements that come over the PA. Last call for passengers going to Morocco, that kind of thing. And finally you say, I don't want to go to, where I thought I was going. I want to go there, the romance of place names. And so I wrote this poem called Distances, because really there's no distance. Who wrote The Distance Anywhere? Someone will know that. No, but there was a book called A Distance Anywhere, and it's an American poet. And too much stuff on the brain. Distances. To get to Tokyo from Istanbul, it's fun to travel when the weather's cool. To reach Madrid by way of Edinburgh, it might be best to leave from Guacamora. The Shangri-La you dream about comes close to meeting mute desire. An Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast of the past, fountains of youth. All colonies project a light from booths in darkened rooms of mind. A picture forms and moves again and spills and warms spaces between the heartbeat and held breath. The distance anywhere, from birth to death, from sit to stand, from heat to holy snow, invents itself, unravels as you go. And all of that fits in today. It's snowing outside. I was standing and now I'm sitting, and all of this, everything comes back to everything else. I love that. Squirrels. Um, I was second or third generation bebop. I think second generation. My father was an auto mechanic. He also worked on the assembly line at. He was a true blue collar person. But in those days, you made enough money in Detroit working on the assembly line that he had a second home. The place was paid for and all that kind of stuff. Every year, he got a new Cadillac because he got a deal, from GM. And when he came out to visit me in California, and I was driving a used Mercedes Benz. I paid $600 for it, but it was shiny and blue and dark with leather seats. Do you remember that? Did you know when I had that car? I took more abuse, because I wrote about it in Bodies and Soul, and I used Janis Joplin's Mercedes Benz as the jumping off point. And one day I was talking with another African American in Palo Alto, California, and we had our respective Mercedes Benzes, and he was parked on one side of the street and I was there, and we were talking about it. And some white wino came and he said, "You goddamn niggers think you go all over the world, don't you?" And it was something I had never forgotten, so I had to write about. Okay, why do I bring all that up? A poem called Squirrels. I think of squirrels as being largely misunderstood. They're incredibly sentient and intelligent creatures. They hide things, they squirrel things away. That's where we get that term from. And the term in drug culture, old-time drug culture, William Burroughs talks about this in Naked Lunch. A squirrel, a junkie was described as a squirrel, was someone who didn't shoot up all the dope at once. You put a little dope away, so you'd have something to take later. So the great Tad Dameron wrote so many wonderful songs. If You Could See Me Now, da 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 dee da do, da 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 dee da. But he wrote one called Squirrel, which is strictly it's a blues, but it's done with rhythmic emphasis. And the main line goes ba da ba 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 do bop, ba da ba 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 do bop bop, 2 beats, da da ba 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 do bop bop bop, and it goes on until you get six beats. And so I imagine that's what he was doing. That was his way of describing squirrels. And then years later, I heard him in a recorded audio interview, and that's exactly what happened. He was sitting in Central Park and watching squirrels do their thing, and that's when he wrote that. Put away 1 nut, 2 nuts, 3 nuts, it's cumulative. So this is the poem that came out of that. Squirrels. Squirrels are skittering outside through the trees of my bedroom window, laying it on the line of my consciousness. Brown and black, furry and scurrying, how can I not help loving them like an old bobster loves licks, laid down, building up so many beats to the moment? Squirrels may be crazy, but they aren't dullards. They like to play too. They can't be hustling nuts and hoard all the time. Like everybody else, they love a good chase now and again. Swishing through branch leaves, drumming on my diamond roof, the shining young squirrels are making and saving the day. Dark red. The Astor Theater was on 12th Street in Detroit, which is now called Rosa Parks Boulevard, I think they call it. I lived on 12th in Edison, which now would be, the house is gone now, but would be Rosa Parks in Edison, and there are all kinds of stories that come out of that. But I bring up the Astor Theater because our parents would get rid of us on Saturdays. Give you a dime and maybe a quarter for getting popcorn and candy and all that. I want you to go up there, they'd show 6 hours of movies for kids and at the Astor Theater. And we didn't know it. We weren't sophisticated about popular culture as we later became. But the Tarzan movies were very popular. There were 2 movies that were very popular. One of them was Wolfman, kids would be roaming the aisles and causing fights and talking and throwing popcorn at each other and all of that stuff. But when Lon Chaney started to, grow that fuzz and turn into the Wolfman, everything would stop in the theater, and everybody would look at that. They were fascinated by that. And the same thing when Tarzan, who really invited a lot of speculation. What was this white man and this white woman? We didn't know if he and Jane were married or what. But they had boy that was their son. And at the time that I walked in, there had been many Tarzans before we got to Johnny Weissmuller, Stanford. He was a Stanford Olympic swimming champion. And so when he would beat his chest and chant that, oh, which we would all do in unison with him out there in the audience. We didn't really understand that these were pop B movies, because they used to rate movies in A movies and B movies. And we didn't know what that was telling us about our view of the world. So I'm in the barbershop on the old 12th Street before it became Jones's Barbershop, before it became Rosa Parks. And Ghana, which had just freed itself from the Brits, it used to be the Gold Coast. The European colonists were not too subtle in what they named places. The Ivory Coast, the gold. They told you exactly. Argentina's where you got the silver, that kind of thing. And he comes in and he's talking about Ghana and making it really sound good. He says, "You must go there. You must go there. This is your heritage and all this." And finally, one of the other barbers the next year said, you ain't gonna trick me over there and have lions and tigers chasing my ass. I've seen those movies, that kind of thing. And the Ghanaian guy just sort of looks at him like with horror, like, where are you getting these ideas? So I saw the first one that that Johnny Weissmuller had made with Jane, and it's pretty interesting because we get the backstory. Jane actually comes from a semi-aristocratic family in London, and her brothers and her father and uncles are very upset that she's taken up with this savage, in Africa. So they make a trip. This is the 1940 Tarzan and his mate. And it was done just before the Hays Code. We didn't know anything about the Hays Code. When you looked at, they brought in this guy Hayes, who had also given James Joyce a hard time. He was a puritanical, kind of judger of things. And after the Fatty Arbuckle debacle, we can't help but say that, which turns out not to have been true. Fatty Arbuckle hadn't raped that woman. Virginia Rapp was her name. But he was set up by a rival film corporation that wanted to push its own comedian. This came out years later after Fatty Arbuckle had been destroyed as a performer. The government, the Congress wanted to investigate the movie business, but the movie mogul said, no, don't do that. We'll police ourselves. So they brought in Hayes. And there were certain things that you just didn't see in American movies. You didn't see a husband and wife even in the same bed. Bogey would mash out his cigarette, and what's her name? Yes, she would mash out her cigarette and they would kiss. You think about that now. And then they would have their crisp pajamas on and they would go off to their respective beds. And we would look at that as kids, my siblings and I, and we thought, wow, this is weird. We thought something was wrong with us inherently, because not only did our parents sleep in the same bed, but sometimes they were butt naked, in the bed, or had on their underwear. They didn't have pajamas and stuff like that. So we got the idea that there was something wrong with us until we later discovered that this was by design. So when you see Tarzan and his mate, you'll see nudity scenes that you never expect to see. Yes, before Hayes came in, clamped down on them, but they're actually butt naked, swimming around and palling around and stuff like that. And it's fun. It's fun to watch. So her father says, "What has gotten into you that you've taken up with this savage?" And she says, "He's not a savage at all, Father. He's white, like us." She actually says that. So this is what this poem is about. It's called Dark Red. It's about a lot of things. Dark red. In an atmosphere of jungle fever, you wait for Jane to say it again. Yes, father, but what you forget is Tarzan is white, like us. Therein lies the rub-a-dub-dub that pins our eyes and ears to the ape man from here to eternity, all out across the snows of Kilimanjaro. Poetry, the dark red color of blood, courses through our veins the way Tarzan's call arrests us as children of the diaspora. From here we go to places no one planned. Radio Pictures, Republic Pictures, RKO, MGM, Warner Brothers, Paramount, 20th Century Fox. All of them worked the dark side of all streets. Slave trader and Nazi Errol Flynn made Robin Hood. Oh, that's a period there. Made Robin Hood. With Olivia de Havilland, his heroine, Flynn flew back to 1191, the days of Richard the Lionhearted and the Crusades, Norman stuff, barons and fiefdoms, and all the land-grabbing and slave-making pageantry soon celebrated as empire, colonial, baronial. To paraphrase New York's Al Smith, no matter how elegant the script, it's still baloney. The insolence of history penned by missionary revisionists. The awkward thought of Britain now. Oh, wow. Oh, culture. Oh, buttermilk. Oh, yogurt. That you were in your lover's arms and she were fit to last the length of dreams. When Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed me Poet Laureate of California in 2005, it was another one of those strange moments in a life that was rife with strangeness, my life. And he said, you're probably wondering, why I would choose someone like you as Poet Laureate. And being an actor, he had memorized some lines from the poem that I'm about to read, and he recited them to me. And he says, the reason I love your poetry, Al Young, is that, first of all, hip-hop people like me. They write me letters, and I can show them to you. But he said, but we have the same ideas about reforming the prison system. We share these ideas. Well, I later found out that, yes, he had ideas about them, but he raised $7 billion to build more prisons in California. And I was for ending all of that. But all of this was happening after the demise of conjugal visits at San Quentin. There was an enlightened period when they actually would let lovers and partners and spouses come in and have monthly visits. I had a student at UC Santa Cruz where I was teaching in a program called Community Studies, which is what it sounds like. We had all kinds of things going on, and it was very exciting. And she would come up to me every month. She'd say, Al, I'm not going to be at class next week because it's conjugal visiting day at the Q. She had married a guy who was locked up, which was kind of a fad in those days. And this was a mother of four who, to get off welfare, had gone back to college to get a degree. And it seems to have worked. But I owe it to her, this poem, another poem that I think I wrote in London, because I was laughing when I finished it. And my girlfriend that I've alluded to, Christina, came in. She says, "You're quite taken with yourself, aren't you?" That kind of thing. I said, I'm taken with this poem, because I didn't know how it was going to come out. But it's become widely anthologized, and I later found, I'd always thought that it was Maria who had selected me as Poet Laureate, because I couldn't believe that Arnold Schwarzenegger, but it turns out that she wanted a woman. She didn't want me at all. He had actually chosen me. And it's just one of those weird things that I, not especially fond of Republicans, end up being chosen by a Republican governor who's proud that he had done that. Conjugal visits, in which the voice that you hear is the reimagined voice of my Santa Cruz middle-aged student telling you about conjugal visits. Conjugal visits. By noon, we'll be deep into it, up reading out loud in bed, or in between our making love, I'll paint my toenails red. Reese say he got to change his name from Maurice to Malik. He think I need to change mine too, conversion, so to speak. I ain't no Muslim yet, I say, besides I like my name. Kamisha still sounds good to me. I'll let you play that game. I'd rather play with you, he say, than trip back to the 60s. The 60s, eh? I'm on his case. Then I won't do my striptease. This brother look at me and laugh. He know I love him bad. Worse, he know exactly how much loving I ain't had. He grabbed me by my puffed up waist and pulled me to him close. He say, I want you in my face or on my face, Miss Toes. That's what it says here. What can I say? I'd lie for Reese, but I'm not quitting school. 4 mouths to feed, not counting mine. Let urban studies rule. I met him in the want ads. We fell in love by mail. I say when people bring this up, wasn't no one up for sale. All these black men crammed up in jail, all this IQ on ice. While governments, bank presidents, the mafia don't think twice. They fly in dope and make real sure their hands stay nice and clean. The chump change Reese made on the street, what's that supposed to mean? For what it costs the state to keep you locked down, clothed, and fed, you could be learning Harvard stuff and brilliant skills, I said. Reese say, just kiss me one more time, then let's get down, make love. Then let's devour that special meal I wish they'd serve more of. They say the third time out's a charm. I kind of think they're right. My first, he was the ace of swords, which didn't make him no knight. He gave me Zeus and Brittany. My second left me twins. This third one ain't about no luck. We're honeymooners, friends. I go see Maurice once a month while Moms looks after things. We'd be so glad to touch again. I dance, he grins, he sings. When I get back home to my kids, schoolwork, the copy shop, ain't no way Reese can mess with me. They got his ass locked up. I think I might stop with that. I've got lots more than I need, but I said I wanted to talk to you guys. And so, I got to read one more. It's 7:20 now by my clock, so if we can run over a little bit, it'll work. It's hard to pick when you say you're going to read one more. When you go to Berkeley, you go down Addison Street, which is the art street. That's where the Berkeley Repertory Theater is, and that's where all the good music is, and a lot of stuff happening on Addison. The great Robert Haas caused these poem plaques to be presented on the sidewalk. I think there are 102 of them, or something like that. And I'm honored to be one of them. This is the poem that you can read that's emblazoned in brass on the Berkeley sidewalk. And for those of you who think about posterity and living for what comes after you, forget it. Because every time I go over there, somebody has even mashed out a cigarette on it, or dropped some pizza on it, or a dog has done the dog thing on it. So it's a comedy. So write for now, here and now, forget about posterity. Who I am in twilight. Like John Lee Hooker, like Lightnin' Hopkins, like the blues himself, the trickster sonnet, hoedown, the tango, the cante hondo, like blessed spirituals and ragas, custom made like sagas, like stories, like slick, slow, sly soliloquies sliding into dramas, like crime and punishment, like death and birth, Canal Street, New Orleans, like the easy, erasable, troubled voices a whirling ceiling fan makes in deep summer nights in hot, unheavenly hotels, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, like the Mississippi River so deep and wide, you couldn't get a letter to the other side, like Grand Canyon, like Yosemite National Park, like beans and cornbread, like rest and recreation, like love and like. I know we last. I know our bleeding stops. Thank you. Thank you.
There's a chance to chat with Al and buy a copy of the book and have him inscribe it. We're going to be having a reception in the better heated dining room. We have a lot of yummy food and wine. Please stay a while. And let's thank Al Young making the trip one more time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. Just hang out with us for a while.